So Sony's kind of been making some big headlines recently with their plans for their upcoming Spider-Man universe. They recently dropped the second trailer for their Venom movie. They announced that Jared Leto will be starring in a Morbius solo film. The screenplay writer for The Equalizer is now working on a Kraven solo film. The previously announced Black Cat and Silver Sable film, which had officially been canceled, is now back and it's being split into 2 films. And they're even going to give a movie to Jackpot. Jackpot, everybody! Yeah! She was in like a handful of issues, like almost a decade ago. So it looks like Sony is serious about making a Spider-Man shared universe. Only one problem. There's no Spider-Man. Yes, Sony has placed all their superhero eggs into a Spider-Man universe that doesn't have Spider-Man in it. Yeah, Sony, we need to talk. You have an addiction to franchises. You're so desperate to create one and get it off the ground that you just keep throwing whatever ideas you have at the screen without stopping to think, does this really work? And honestly, it's time for an intervention because I'm a Spider-Man fan and I've got some opinions on your latest attempts to create a Spider-Man cinematic universe without Spider-Man in it. Man, that is a weird sentence to say. Now, just to give you guys a little background on this whole situation for anyone who doesn't follow all the wheelings and dealings of these heroes and what studio owns who, Sony owns the rights to Spider-Man because Marvel sold them the rights back in the 90s when Marvel went bankrupt. And I've never been bankrupt, but I'm going to assume that when you do go bankrupt, you're willing to sign any piece of paper that gets put in front of your pen in the hopes that you'll be able to dig yourself out of there, and you don't really have much of a leg to stand on when it comes to negotiating. And part of the deal that Marvel signed was that Sony would hold on to the rights for Spider-Man pretty much forever as long as they kept making Spider-Man films. But after they pretty much tanked the first franchise thanks to studio meddling, started a second franchise that was mostly a hodgepodge of ideas taken from other movies that never really got off the ground, Disney came in here and said, listen, you're going to keep digging this grave until you hit China, and they don't want to watch these movies either. But we want to get the Marvel Cinematic Universe completely together again, and we want all our superheroes under one house, so here's the deal. We get to put Spider-Man in our cinematic universe, and in exchange, we will make your Spider-Man movies for you. But we will still call them a Sony production, which means that you get to profit off of them without having to lift a finger. You finally get a good Spider-Man movie, it's linked to our blockbuster so you get a ton of cross promotions, and we're literally just giving this to you. That's an amazing deal. You would have to be crazy to want to meddle with that. That would be like winning the lottery and then spending all that money on more lottery tickets. Yeah, remember, this is Sony. Making the smart decision is not what they're known for. Instead, they decided, hey, superheroes are still big, and we might not be able to make any Spider-Man movies for the Marvel Cinematic Universe, or any movies starring Spider-Man in our own universe, but nobody said that we can't make movies about all the other Spider-Man characters in their own universe. Yeah, nobody said that because they all thought, that's crazy, why would you be dumb enough to do something like that? So now Sony has made a Venom movie coming out in October, they've begun casting a Morbius film, hired a writer for a Kraven film, the former Black Cat Silver Sable movie that had officially been cancelled has risen from the grave as not just one movie but 2, one for each character, and they've even said that they're going to make movies based around Jackpot and Nightwatch. 2 characters so obscure, even die-hard Spidey fans had to race to Wikipedia when that announcement was made. I mean, for crying out loud, Nightwatch is so forgettable, I kid you not, I forgot to put him in this initial script. I had to go back in and add him later. And if you think all that sounds crazy, I'd like to remind you that at one point in time, Sony was literally going to make an origin story movie for Aunt May, where she was going to be a spy in the 60s. Hey everyone, it's me, Aaron. You know, that guy who's hosting this thing that you're all watching. I know this is a little bit odd, but after that last line, I thought it was important to come in here so you could all see my face so you would know for certain I'm not joking when I say that's actually something they were going to do. Note the total lack of humor or sarcasm in my expression. That was real. Alright, great. Enjoy the rest of the video, everyone. Now, I've got several problems with these plans that I'm going to go through, but before I begin, let me just go ahead and clarify something. I am in no way coming in here and saying every single one of these movies are absolutely going to be bad. Not at all. I have not seen these movies yet. They could absolutely surprise me. I am only judging these plans based on what we've seen in the trailers, what they've said about their future plans, what we've heard from behind the scenes, and of course Sony's recent track record with, well, pretty much everything. But these movies could actually turn out to be great. They could be huge surprises. I mean, sure, all the dialogue in the Venom trailer sounds like they didn't know what to write there, so they just put filler dialogue from the Venom Wikipedia page and forgot to come back later and correct it.
I'm a reporter. I follow people that do not want to be followed. The guy you work for is an evil person. If you're gonna stay, you will only hurt bad people. I found something really bad. What about the allegations that you recruit the most vulnerable for tests that end up killing people? Everyone's got their thing.
But that isn't to say that everything in there looks bad. I mean, at least the visuals look good. I mean, it looks like Venom alright, so at least they got that part down.
Like a bird in the wind.
The visuals look good. Let's just hold on to that for now. But speaking of Venom, let's start by looking at his upcoming film, because as I said, I've got a lot of concerns with Sony's plans, and Venom is the perfect example of my first big problem. Because even if they got the look of Venom down, they're still trying to adapt him without Spider-Man. And Venom doesn't really exist without Spider-Man. Listen, there are indeed characters in Spider-Man's universe whose stories and adventures aren't tied too heavily to Spider-Man and can exist on their own. But Venom? Not only did the symbiote get its start by being a suit for Spider-Man, but Eddie Brock hated Spider-Man. He lost his job because of Spider-Man and swore revenge on him. So the whole appeal of Venom in the beginning was that he was two beings that wanted revenge on Spider-Man coming together. He was also actually really scary in the beginning because he knew Spider-Man's secret identity and he didn't set off his spider sense. I'll never forget when I read one of his early stories and I saw him just pop up at Aunt May's house and Peter was completely surprised. It made my little 10-year-old heart stop beating for a second. So his origin is practically cemented in Spider-Man, and some of the most interesting sides to the character all come from his relationship with Spidey. And yes, later on he went on to become an anti-hero, a lethal protector who split off to do his own thing, even moving to the other side of the country to fully get away from Spider-Man. So I'll admit, it is possible that you could completely change everything about his origin, but just make a film focusing on that part of his life, just focusing on his own solo adventures after leaving Spider-Man behind. But to me, that's kind of like making a Captain America movie set in a world where World War II never happened. Sure, you could do it, but a major chunk of what made that character who they are is now gone. But as bad as that is for Venom, it goes double, triple, hell, I'll just jump right up to a tuple for Kraven. Kraven was a hunter who had conquered every challenge in his way, had bagged every beast imaginable, so he became bored with it. And he decided to hunt Spider-Man because he thought that hunting a superhero would provide him with a challenge. He thought Spider-Man would be worthy prey. Also because he was kind of insane and thought Spider-Man was actually some human spider creature. Point is, the entire appeal of Kraven is that he decided to start hunting a superhero. If you take away the superhero from the equation, then what is he? He's just a big game hunter. He's a poacher. That's the guy we're going to be following in his own movie? That's the protagonist you want me to root for? Why? Why do I want to watch a movie about a guy who just hunts big animals? Actually, that brings up an important question. Is he going to hunt anyone in here? I mean, Venom and Morbius are at least anti-heroes. You could find a random obscure villain to have them go up against, but Kraven? Kraven was a straight up villain from start to finish. So who is he going to go up against? he kind of had one specific hero he focused on, and it's the hero you're not allowed to use. And for anyone who says, well, why does he have to fight anyone? I repeat, Kraven was a poacher. If he doesn't fight a human villain at some point, it's kind of just him killing endangered species for 2 hours. I don't really want to watch that. In fact, speaking of Sony giving more villains movies, there's rumors that Sony is still trying to use Kraven and Morbius to set up a Sinister Six team film. Basically, they're evil Avengers who will be villains from several different movies all coming together. That's an interesting idea, but it brings me back to the small matter of who the heck are they going to fight? You can't have a team of villains with no hero. I mean, okay, fine. Devil's advocate here, in theory, you could have them pull off a heist. You could have the whole movie be these villains coming together for an Ocean's 11 or Heat style movie where they have to pull off one big score. But then you've got superhumans fighting just regular cops. Yeah, that's kind of one-sided. But in all fairness, there is a possibility that I'm ignoring here, that they could make Kraven a good guy. They could remove his history as a hunter of rare animals, his obsession with hunting superhumans, have him be some kind of a hero who protects nature and now he's hunting poachers himself. Think John Wick, but replace the dog with a rhino. Someone comes into Kraven's preserve, kills a rare animal in there just for fun, and now Kraven goes and finds his entire team of poachers and takes each of them down. That would actually be a movie that I could see working and being thoroughly entertaining. But that brings me to the second problem with what we've seen from Sony's plans. Yes, you can make movies about these characters without Spider-Man, but you'd have to change a lot about them. And don't get me wrong, I'm not one of these people who says that the movie has to be exactly like the comics. No, in fact, they shouldn't be. It's a different medium with a different format of presenting the story and it's aimed at a different audience. You should change things in the movie. I've heard so many people saying the Marvel movies aren't anything like the comics, and I'm 100% okay with that because when you adapt a source material like comics that span decades into movies that span 2 hours, what's important isn't the details, it's the heart. It's capturing what these characters mean and the elements that make them who they are. Take Winter Soldier, for example. That movie is incredibly different from the comics. Heck, the A story of it isn't even close to the A story of that comic. But none of that matters because Captain America still acts like Captain America. His message, his morals, his motivation were all the same. He was plagued by being a man out of time, a necessary part of Captain America's character. The relationship between Cap and Bucky was still the same, and that was the central focus of the film. You still felt the pain of Cap seeing his oldest friend now brainwashed to be an assassin who didn't remember him. That's the important stuff behind that story and these characters. Hydra, S.H.I.E.L.D., Gary Shandling, none of that matters as long as you capture these elements. But here, okay, when it comes to Venom, yes, you have to change where the symbiote comes from. And honestly, that's fine. Where it comes from isn't important as long as it still behaves the same. And honestly, it still looks like it's going to behave the same in these trailers. So okay, you've got that part down. And yes, you have to change his driving motivation, his reason for existing. But as I said, if you jump far enough down the timeline, then I guess you can capture those years of his career where he was separate from Spider-Man. But Kraven? Forget changing him for a universe with no Spider-Man just to make him a likable enough character that the audience actually roots him on as the protagonist. You'd have to basically change about 90% of his character. Again, I know I'm judging a film that hasn't even gotten a script yet, but honestly, these are questions that need to be answered. How do you turn this guy into a protagonist? Take away him being a poacher, hunting superheroes, being a villain, Russian, because yeah, let's be real, Sony is not going to ask audiences to listen to a guy with an accent for 2 hours, and all you're left with is a jungle man with a big cat jacket. At this point, he's so different from the comics, you might as well just create a new character. a character that you, Sony, would own and not have to worry about sharing with another company, or merging with other comic book characters, or researching any kind of history or continuity behind them. It actually feels like creating your own character would require far less work on your part and have far more benefits in the long run, so why even bother sticking with Kraven? I'll tell you why, and it's my next big problem. Sony is relying on the names of these characters to sell them. Sony thinks that the comic book audience and the names of these characters are big enough to keep these movies afloat by themselves. Guys, I love the comic book audience. I'm glad they're finally getting these films. That's great. But they're not going to make that Kraven movie happen. Venom has some name recognition. He's probably the most popular of these characters that are getting movies. But Kraven, Morbius, Silver Sable, Jackpot, that other guy whose name I've already forgotten again, they are not big enough names to be sold just on, hey, it's this guy from the comics. Okay, actually, he's not the guy from the comics. We actually had to change him around a lot, but I mean, they have the same name, right? Yes, a fair number of comic fans know Kraven, but again, even if you are a die-hard Kraven fan, of which there aren't many, more than likely his character is going to change a lot for the movie, so at that point, you're basically just selling him on the name, and nobody loves Kraven so much that they are willing to see a movie just because it has a guy named Kraven in it. And Morbius has almost no name recognition, so you're basically just trying to sell him on the fact that he exists in comics and he's a vampire. You know, because that vampire craze is still going on. What's that? It died 10 years ago? Well, someone didn't tell Sony. And Jackpot? Jackpot is a character who has been in literally only 15 issues. The first of which was 10 years ago, the last of which was 8 years ago. 15 issues over the course of 2 years, and they're giving her a movie. You could literally read every comic appearance she's ever had in the same amount of time it would take the average superhero movie to run. These characters do not have the recognition to bring in the audience you need. And I know what you might be saying. Why do they need name recognition? Not everything needs name recognition to sell. And you know what? You're totally right. You are absolutely correct. If everything needed name recognition, then there would never be any original characters or stories. It's crazy to say that you need name recognition to sell. Sometimes you can just sell on the premise alone. I mean, look at Silver Sable and Black Cat. In all honesty, both of them actually have a shot at being successes because Silver Sable is a spy film and Black Cat would be a heist film because she's a thief. Both of those genres never really go out of style. They would both work completely being sold on their own to an audience that does not know these characters. And we've even seen other comic book movies with no name recognition actually become big hits. Just look at Guardians of the Galaxy.
Who?
Nobody knew who that team was, but then they ended up becoming one of the most explosive movie franchises of all time. But here's why I'm bringing that up. Marvel didn't advertise Guardians of the Galaxy with some vague, mysterious flashes of Chris Pratt, followed by an image of his mask just flashing up there on the screen. That would be crazy. Who would be dumb enough to advertise a character like that?
You used to be one thing. Now, you're something else. We all have our own problems.
Okay, comic book fans, I know all of you know what this is. I know people really big into pop culture can probably recognize it too. But for the average audience member out there, the people who make up about 60 to 80% of the people who go to see these superhero movies, yeah, Sony, I got news for you. This is not the bat symbol. This is not Superman's S. This is not Captain America's shield. It's not even Hawkeye's arrow. To the vast majority of audience out there who saw this teaser pop up, they just saw teeth. That's it. But hey, I'm sure that as soon as the name pops up there, that's going to grab their attention. Oh! The teaser didn't even say the name of the movie. They just had a V. Sony, the average audience member has no idea what the hell that means. Heck, I'd be willing to bet that a ton of audience members looked at this and probably thought it was a reboot of that old sci-fi show.
Prepare yourself for a television event that's out of this world. Prepare for the next.
But Sony thinks that's enough. They think all Venom needs is just a picture of his face and the letter V. He doesn't need anything more. He does. He needs a lot more. Here's a perfect comparison. Deadpool is another character beloved by comic fans, pop culture fanatics, and just the internet as a whole. In fact, let's be real here. Between Venom and Deadpool in a contest of who has more name brand recognition before his respective film came out, the army of Deadpool meme makers has Venom beat. Way more people could recognize Deadpool before his first trailer even dropped than could recognize Venom, and yet go back and watch the first trailer for Deadpool. It had a setup, an introduction to the character. It showed off the action, the costume, and most importantly, it showed off the heart of Deadpool. It showed his sense of humor and the love for violence that his franchise is known for. So that way, even people who had no idea who Deadpool was got enough of an idea to appreciate him and start thinking about whether or not they wanted to see his movie. Imagine if the first trailer for Deadpool went like this.
We all have our own problems. Our own demons.
Yeah, kinda stupid, right? But Sony thinks that's a good idea because, hey, all they need to do is show a V and people will be excited because Sony thinks these characters are that big of a deal. Again, going back around to it, we're getting a Kraven movie where he will more than likely only share the name with the character, and to me, that just screams Sony thinking, yeah, the name is all we need. And the fact that they keep bringing up Spider-Man these pitches and they keep reminding everyone this is part of their Spider-Man line of films, it just feels like them saying, yeah, this is all part of the Spider-Man universe. You know, that guy who can't legally be in any of these movies and we're changing all of these characters so much that they don't resemble their comic book selves, but we're sure that the comic book audience is still going to come in here because they share the names with these characters.
Not a great plan.
But hey, as I said, I could totally be wrong. Somehow this could all work. These movies could be great. But based on what we've seen and Sony's track record, most signs are pointing to no. But hey, lots of studios screw up. The important thing is whether or not they learn to adapt and course correct down the road. Which leads me to problem number 4. Sony! Maybe, just maybe, before you start working on 7 or 8 films in a Spider-Man universe that can't use Spider-Man, maybe you should dip your toe in the water with 1 or 2 and then see how they're received. You know, in case nobody likes them and they won't want to come back for the sequels. Guys, I know I'm being really negative here. I know I'm ranting like the angry man-child you're all totally right to call me in the comments, but I want to assure you, I am trying. Really trying to be positive. I know that it is totally possible each of these movies could turn out to be great and Sony might finally have a winning franchise on its hand. But what if it's not? What if they're bad and Sony has to adjust? Doesn't it feel like maybe you should only be working on 2 or tops 3 movies at first until it's all figured out, instead of 7 or 8? Sony doesn't just want 1 movie a year. They want 3 like the big boys over at Marvel. Except Marvel took their time building up to this because they knew that if they just dove headfirst into these movies without seeing what worked, they'd probably crash and burn too quickly. If you start working on 7 or 8 films all at once, then any mistake that you have in your early films that would otherwise go on to affect 1 or 2 other movies is now going to affect all 7 or 8 other movies. I know that you are trying to strike while the superhero iron is hot, but it's been hot for almost 2 decades now. Trust me, you're fine taking your time on this. If anything, overloading audiences with too many new superhero films all at once won't guarantee the continued success of the genre, but might actually make audiences sick of it. I mean, for God's sakes, Sony is so desperate to get whatever they can out there, they released the Venom teaser trailer before they had time to put any of the effects in. I know that a lot of my complaining here today just sounds like whiny fanboy ranting, but this complaint here, this isn't the fanboy in me talking. This is just bad business. Investing this much time and this many resources into years and years of projects before you even know if one of them is going to work, that's the kind of thing that could tank a company, especially one that has been facing so many financial problems over the past couple years. If you actually planned on making any of these. Yes, dear viewers, those are my 4 big complaints about the Sony Spider-Man films, and it's around this point that I should start wrapping everything up. Come up with a big moral for this whole crazy situation. Think about what we learned. Except that there's a whole side to this situation that I haven't even addressed yet, which is that I don't think any of this is real. Let's think about this, shall we? Venom got announced as soon as Spider-Man was said to be coming to the Marvel Cinematic Universe. But they didn't come in here and say, hey, Venom is popular, so we're going to give him a movie. No, they were upfront about saying he's going to be in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. He's going to be right there in the same world as Peter Parker and the Avengers and Iron Man and the Guardians of the Galaxy. He's going to be part of all this. Sony is now making a Marvel Cinematic Universe Venom movie.
So there is a chance that Tom Holland as Spider-Man will pop up somewhere over there. There's always a chance.
There's always a chance.
And of course, Kevin Feige and Disney had to step in there and tell them to back the fudge off, and there was no way in hell that was actually going to happen. Then they announced an animated Miles Morales film, which I haven't talked about yet, but I'll be covering more about that in just a second. But they announced that shortly after there was a movement on the internet to try and get Miles to be the MCU version of Spider-Man rather than Peter Parker. It's pretty obvious that they looked at that and said, hey, you guys like Miles? We'll give you Miles, all the Miles, tons of Miles. These 2 films seem very reactionary. It felt like they were thought up on the spot to take advantage of the moment. And it didn't stop there. The Kraven movie and a Mysterio movie were announced the week before Spider-Man Homecoming came out, when Spider-Man craze was at a fever pitch. So okay, again, very reactionary, but it seems like a decent time to announce something like that. But here's where it gets nuts. In late November of last year, there were rumors spraying around about a deal happening between Disney and Fox where Disney would actually buy out this other major studio. Something insane that would change the face of Hollywood for years to come. And it was at this time when these rumors started flying around that Sony announced the Morbius movie. Okay, a bit of odd timing, but sure, why not? However, at the end of July, the shareholders voted to approve the deal for Disney to buy Fox. What happened literally the week after this deal was approved? Sony announced that the previously dead Silver Sable Black Cat team-up film was alive again and now would be 2 movies. And they were also working on a Jackpot and Nightwatch movie, 2 characters who, once again, are so obscure I feel like I need to remind you of who they are every single time that I bring them up. At first, I thought Sony had lost their mind announcing all these films, but then it hit me. As I said, Sony doesn't act like they have a plan. They act very reactionary, like they just come up with something based off what's happening in the news that day. And I think that's exactly what we're seeing here. I don't think Sony has any plans to actually make these movies. I think they saw the Fox Disney deal happening and they thought, we want in. I think Sony is trying to take its movie studio over to Disney's doorstep and say, hey, I heard you were collecting these things like Pokemon. How much can I get for a movie studio? Except Sony's track record has been so bad, both with critics and audiences alike, that the answer to that question would be not much. However, if Sony can try and make it look like they have a plan, if they can try and make it look like, hey, everyone loves Spider-Man, right? Well, what if I told you that we had a whole Spider-Man universe in the works? Then they might raise their asking price. Oh, this house is dilapidated and falling apart? Well, what if I install some curtains and track lighting? Now can I charge twice as much for it? And honestly, I don't know how to feel about this. Because on the one hand, I would love it if Marvel could just get Spider-Man back 100%, no crazy deals or restrictions. But on the other hand, Disney is way too big. To me, Disney after the Fox deal will be right on the edge of being too powerful, and anything else would push them over that. But Sony is so... let's not mince words, they're bad. Certainly not good. So I'd love for someone to buy them up. But if someone else bought them out, what would happen to Spider-Man? Remember, Spidey is only in the MCU on loan. Sony can still technically pick up their ball and go home whenever they want. So what would happen if someone buys Sony? Would they let Marvel keep using him? I fully believe Sony is trying real hard to get Disney to buy them. But Disney might not have any interest in them outside of Spidey. So what if this all backfires on them and Sony is now stuck with 8 Spider-Man spin-off films that they have to keep paying for in order to continue this charade and make it look like they have a plan, make their studio look like it's worth way more than it actually is? That's the kind of thing that really could end up tanking their entire studio, or it could lead to them getting so desperate for Disney to buy them that they'll just say, you know what, screw Disney. Anybody who wants to buy us, anybody at all, we're taking any offers we can get right now. And then all of a sudden, another major competitor like Warner Brothers comes in there and buys them up. You think Warner Brothers is going to let Disney use Spider-Man? Not likely. So yes, I've been listing off several problems I've had with these proposed Spider-Man movies, but most of them have just been fanboy problems. Just, I think this sounds like a bad movie. But hey man, I'm a film critic. I watch countless bad movies, and then I move on with my life. But this is a real problem. Trying to artificially inflate the number of films you're working on just to try and make your studio look big and raise your stock or possibly allow you to sell off for a higher price? That's the kind of thing that could cost you money. And not a little, I'm talking millions. It's the kind of thing that could cause people to lose their jobs. It could screw over the Spider-Man connection to the Marvel Cinematic Universe for future films. This is just wildly reckless, and it screams to me of someone who isn't thinking about the massive consequences of their actions. But I want to end on a positive, which is going to be really hard considering that I just said that this could lead to the downfall of an entire studio. But there are some positives in here, because if you'll notice, there are some of these Spider-Man movies that I haven't brought up yet. Because honestly, I think they've got hope. Namely, Into the Spider-Verse, which features Miles Morales in the lead. This actually looks like what Sony should be doing. Don't get me wrong, I don't like the idea of them introducing 10 alternate reality Spider-Man all at the start. Yes, comic book fans are cool with that, but trust me when I say the average audience member is going to have more than a few questions about this. That's the kind of thing that you need to slowly introduce, and that brings me back to Sony's big problem of not wanting to introduce anything. They want everything right now. However, aside from that, you've got a hero. A hero who has his own cast of supporting characters and friends and his own villains and adventures that revolve solely around him that you could totally adapt into a film. You don't need Peter Parker in a Miles Morales film to make it work. But they are going to put Peter Parker in the movie, but he's not in there to be the star. He is in a role just there to let the audience know this is in some way connected to the Spider-Man that you're already familiar with. But he's not the central focus of the film. He's just going to be here so you won't be confused, and then he's going to back away and let the new kid be the star. And lastly, it's animated, which is so smart, because the average audience member doesn't follow the wheelings and dealings of these studios and what characters they own. So if you had another live action Peter Parker pop up, so many people would look at him and go, wait, that's not Tom Holland. Where's Tom Holland? Did they recast Tom Holland? Are the Avengers going to be in this? But you make it animated and everyone instantly understands, oh, this is not that. And making it animated makes it completely different from all the other superhero movies out there. And right now, that's the path to success. Nobody wants just regular superhero movies anymore. It has to feel unique. It has to have something different to it, something no one else is doing. Making this film animated would totally work. So, if you follow this, if you lean into the animated approach, focus completely on Miles and other heroes who have their own lives outside of Peter Parker, such as Silk, who you have also announced for a film, but you still have Peter show up just enough in the background to say, hey audience, this is how all this works. This is how all this is tied together. You got it? Everybody understand? Cool, swing it away now. Then honestly, I think you could build something special here. Or you could, I don't know, give the Lizard an 8-movie deal and totally Sony this whole thing up. Only time will tell. But for now, thanks for tuning in to another episode of ediTHORGIals, and we're not quite done talking about these Spider-Man movies just yet. In just a few days, we'll have a new episode of Pitching In, the show where we pitch our crazy ideas of how to adapt our favorite geeky properties into movies and TV shows all around this idea. So if you want to see that, then hit that subscribe button, and if you like this episode, then please share it around the web. It's the best way to help our channel grow. And you can always stay up to date with us on Twitter and Twitch at Professor Thorgy. Thanks for tuning in, everyone. Come back next time.